welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in today and joining in our program. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. We're going to cover a very, very important topic here today. Everybody by now, I think, will have heard that the Supreme Court of Canada had a pretty significant ruling yesterday as it applies to the price on pollution, or the carbon tax, as is often referred to on this program. I think we are having a little bit of trouble with our Twitter live stream here today, but you can watch it on YouTube and Facebook. It looks like it's not coming through on Twitter, so I apologize for that. If you want to participate in today's show, what I would like you to do is drop your comment or your question in the box, whether you're watching on any of those platforms. We love to have your participation. I know for a fact that the carbon tax is something that you are quite passionate about out there in farm country. And we've been doing these Freestyle Fridays, and I have clips. Well, today I actually have real guests, like people that are actually here at the same time. So let's bring him in here right now. Up first, Todd Lewis of APAS. Hey, Todd, how are you?
Real good, Shaun. Thanks.
Yeah, you getting a little bit closer to seeding out there? You getting ready? You getting itchy?
Yeah, getting itchy. Yesterday something happened that hasn't happened here for a while. We had enough rain that actually washed some dust off the roof of the shed. So that makes things always a little more optimistic, I guess. But we don't have any snow cover at all here south of Regina, and the guys you can see the air seeder hooked up, and things are getting going. That's for sure.
Great to see. Also joining us here today to provide a really, really good perspective. Looking forward to hearing from you. We've had her on the show before when it came to the Clean Fuel Standard. Marla Orenstein from the Canada West Foundation. Marla, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Shaun?
Hey, doing fantastic. Hey, Marla, tell the audience what you do and where you focus on at the Canada West Foundation.
Yeah, sure. So the Canada West Foundation is a nonpartisan, independent public policy think tank. So we take a look at all kinds of issues that relate to public policy, and particularly how the West can prosper as we go forward in this federalist system that we have. And I'm the director of the Natural Resources Center. So anything having to do with carbon falls on my lap.
Okay, well, let's start with the Supreme Court decision. Marla, were you at all surprised by the ruling?
I wasn't terribly surprised by the ruling. I think most people actually expected it to go the way that it did. I was surprised to see the dissenting opinions and the strength of them. And I think that, from what I've heard, they make up a really important part of what's going out there. It's not just a question of what did the majority rule and what's going to happen in the future, but a lot of it was about the why and why did people rule the way that they did.
Yeah. Todd, were you at all surprised?
Well, we had been in intervener status, our group APAS there at the provincial level. And we weren't, everything you read, and it pointed to a pretty difficult hill to climb at the national level. But at the same time, I agree the split decision was interesting, and certainly some very strong dissenting opinions. So it was, definitely a worthwhile exercise, and it gives some clarity now around where we're headed next. And the court cases are out of the way, so let's get on with business and try and get a program in place that's going to be beneficial for everybody and not so hard against agriculture.
But Todd, isn't it like apropos that there would be like pretty like wide opinions on this fact, because Canadians have been arguing this is what's been happening in the general public? Why shouldn't it be that way at the Supreme Court too?
Yeah, I think it wasn't about the tax itself. Of course, it was on a constitutional matter about provincial jurisdiction and those kind of issues. So it's it wasn't a public opinion poll. It was a constitutional question. So it is what it is, and we live with it. And certainly, from Western Canada viewpoint, it's a difficult pill to swallow, but that's the country we live in.
Yeah, Marla, I saw your commentary right after the decision, and essentially saying, "Okay, it's time to move on." Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's. I go back to what Todd just said, which is not. This was an agreement about, is this the best approach? Is this the right approach? Is it what people want to do? It was really just a question about the constitutionality of whether or not the federal government had the right to do it. And the court ruled, yes, they do have the right to do it. And what that does is it means, yes, okay, we've got agreement on this. The battling is over on whether or not it's constitutional. And so it's going to be a part of our lives moving forward, which gives certainty, at least to businesses. It gives certainty to the public. It gives certainty to consumers and to investors that this is what's going to be happening, and that the choices that we make in the context of knowing what's going to be happening in the future of the carbon tax, we can at least make choices that are durable and aren't so subject to potentially flip-flopping, let's say, another year from now.
Yeah, okay, but I hear you on what this was actually about, but I'm not sure the federal government has followed that advice either, though, because I was hearing yesterday, see, this is like, carbon tax it is. The price of pollution is the way to go. So even the federal government maybe wasn't looking, they were using this as obviously some political leverage.
Yeah, I have yet to see any sort of an announcement where any provincial or federal government doesn't take it as an opportunity for posturing on their favorite thing, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair, I guess. Okay, so Todd, Marla says it's time to move on. What do farm groups do now? APAS is one of the farm groups. They spent a lot of time, a lot of dollars, trying to fight against the carbon tax. So how does a farm group pivot now?
Well, there's current all the way along. There's been negotiations on. We're seeing some of that right now on the carbon credit side. Excuse me. What how we're going to treat sequestration. And that's a big ticket item in for Western Canadian producers with the amount of sequestration that's happened over the last number of decades. So there's an example there where we're negotiating and consulting with both the province and the federal government. Hopefully the provinces have some wiggle room. The devil's going to be in the details with the federal government if they're going to make the rules hard enough that the provinces can't manage to get a better place for agriculture. Under the federal guidelines, it's going to be difficult. So time will tell. We'll keep doing what we've been doing, and hopefully we'll get some traction on this.
Yeah, Marla, can you explain this explain this to us a little bit? It's Friday. My tongue's getting tied here. Explain now what happened, because we saw Saskatchewan Premier Moe say yesterday, now we're going to come up with our own system. How Todd just alluded to that. How does all that fit? The provincial system, and then you have the federal one. How does that all tie together or replace one or the other?
Yeah, so fundamentally, we keep calling this a carbon tax, but it's not actually a tax. It's actually a pricing system, and it's a backstop pricing system. So what the federal government put out and what was ruled to be constitutional is they didn't say every province has to have the same approach. They just said you have to have these minimum standards in place, and after that, you can choose how you want to do it. So kind of like how we do healthcare, all the provinces are required to have a sort of a minimum healthcare that's provided to the citizens, but how they choose to do that can be a little bit different. Right now, most of the provinces have something in place already, and it's really different. Like Quebec has a cap and trade system that's tied in with California. That's been ruled to be stringent enough, but it's an approach that meets the federal standard. So that's the way that they're going. New Brunswick is doing something a little bit tricky. They have a price on carbon, but at the same time that they've increased that price on carbon, they've ratcheted down the gasoline tax, so that ostensibly they have something that's there, but actually in terms of out of pocket for people, it's not such a bad hit. So everybody's doing something a little bit different. So with the constitutionality of this, now Alberta and Saskatchewan have a choice to make. They can either do what they're doing now, which is the federal government is collecting that money and returning it to individuals in those provinces, or they can do what Saskatchewan seems to be leaning towards, which is saying, okay, maybe we'll develop our own system so that at least the money stays in our pocket. We'll meet the criteria. We'll make sure that it matches what the federal government says, but we're going to figure out best how we want to do it ourselves. And Premier Kenney in Alberta has also said he's going to try to figure out what is best for Albertans going forward and put something in place there. We don't know what it'll look like yet.
But they have to do something, or else it's the federal system. The feds collect the money.
Yeah, so they have the choice to do nothing. They could not put anything in place, and then what we have now will still keep going on, which is the money goes into the federal coffers and then gets returned to individuals. But that may not be the best strategy for the province because they don't have any say in how they're going to use the cash.
Todd, you hope, obviously, I'm going to assume that you hope that in Saskatchewan, in your case, they develop their own system.
I think that's where we're headed, and Premier Mo signaled that yesterday. So, time will tell. How effective system we can create here, a Made in Saskatchewan plan, and the in the past with carbon management, Alberta, for instance, had a carbon credit program that their producers participated in. It was an opportunity for them to get some money back out of things like sequestration, where Saskatchewan didn't have a program like that. So it's been ongoing, and really this carbon modeling, it's 10 or 12 different programs by the time you include the territories, totally different programs. None of them are going to be the same, and so hopefully we can get a Made in Saskatchewan plan that's going to do a better job than the federal backstop does right now.
Yeah. Todd, I know how you get acceptance in Saskatchewan of this. Just put the Rough Rider logo on it.
Well, that's another issue. We need to play first here in 2021.
That is absolutely fair, for sure. So, Todd, this whole idea about exemptions, the federal government has sort of pivoted a little bit and moved to where they're talking about they're going to have a rebate system when it comes to things like grain drying and other activities as well. Are you encouraged by that, or sort of probably still thinking about the workload to get us to the other side and make sure you get a good decision for ag?
Yeah, I think, that's a good example of where we've got some traction, on carbon management, and what farmers do, and how some of these added costs are really going to affect our bottom line. So, exemption is best, I think. Leave the money in farmers' pockets. It's, there's not as much administration, all those kind of things. So who knows what the rebate program may look like, but, exemptions seem to be, certainly from our viewpoint, a better way to go than rebates. But let's see what the plan's going to be, and and when it comes to opportunities within it, we're talking about fuel standards, all those kind of. There may be market opportunities there for agriculture. Sequestration file and carbon credits are another opportunity. So I think we need to move on with this and try and get the best deal we can for agriculture. And that's that's what the public expects. I think the general public the carbon pricing model seems to be what people want to see in parts of this country. It doesn't work for Western Canada, a lot of Western Canada right now, but hopefully we'll be able to develop programming in these individual provinces that are far better than where we are right now.
Marla, is there a reason why the federal government would going with rebates as opposed to exemptions on activities like, say, grain drying, where there is no replacement activity? Like, there's no solar powered or wind powered grain dryers. So instead of giving an exemption on the carbon tax for that carbon used, they're going to give a rebate. Is there a reason why they would go that direction?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I could speculate and just say I don't know that it's going to be as easy for them to tell what fuel is going towards grain drying as opposed to being sent to your neighbor down the street and being used in their house to heat their homes. So I'm really not sure. But I think that particularly with what we've seen with COVID over the last year, the importance of the ag sector has just been reinforced, not just to government, but to the public, and making sure that we have a working, functional agricultural sector that is really thriving is absolutely critical.
Yeah, Jim Hale, watching in Lancer, Saskatchewan, says the reason they go with rebates is so you forget to make the rebate application, they can keep the money. See, yeah. Jim.
Some healthy skepticism going on there.
I like it. Okay, Marla, you do a lot of work in the overall energy industry. How is the oil and gas sector looking at the price on pollution? Because I'll see a story in the Globe and Mail, be like, such and such energy company is going to be like net zero, or they're in favor of the price in pollution. What's going on here?
Yeah, one thing that I found really interesting is that the day before the Supreme Court ruling, the American Petroleum Institute, along with a bunch of the major American oil and gas developers, went to the Biden government and said that they were in favor of having a carbon tax, which I thought was really interesting. And their rationale is that they thought a carbon tax is more transparent and easier and makes better choices than what they're trying to avoid, which is layers on layers of different types of regulations. But the fact that they came out so strongly in favor of saying, yep, carbon tax is the way to go, the day before that we had this ruling, I thought that was super interesting. In many ways, a lot of the oil and gas companies in Canada have been out in front leading this parade. They may not like an additional price on things, but more than that, they don't like the flip-flopping. They don't like the idea that maybe we'll have it, maybe we won't have it, and that they can't really make business decisions based on what they should be doing in an environment where they're not sure if it's going to be there in the future or not. So I think for them to have the certainty put some of their worries to rest right now.
That's interesting, right? Because you would think if there was a sector that would be against a price on like a carbon tax, it would be the oil and gas sector, but they're not. How much of that, Marla, though? I don't know, let me be cynical. How much of that is driven by Wall Street?
You mean in the sense of getting investment into their hands?
Yeah. So like qualifying for green investment and like how stuff like that. Like there's so much of this is being sustainable funds, things like those.
Yeah, I think part of it is investment in general, leaving aside the green part of it for a minute. Investment in general wants certainty. So anything where they can say, yeah, we know what's going to be happening in 5, 10, 20 years certainly helps, because it's that uncertainty that tends to drive investment away. But then you're completely right that it aligns with more of the green transition and green energy funds that are there. It helps them build the story that they're not, some evil actor off in the corner laughing into their mustache, but that they are actually trying to be a part of the solution and being subject to, well, having the product subject to the carbon tax, but also being part of this output-based emission system helps them make that case.
So if the oil and gas sector is saying this, why has Premier Kenney been so against it?
It's a really good question. I mean, part of it is that government seems to see it as a bit of a Trojan horse for federal intrusion into a lot of different areas. That's still a little bit up in the air. Some people say, no, it's absolutely not. Some people are worried that it is. The Supreme Court decision was really, really clear that they ruled in favor of the federal government, but only within these really, really narrow boundaries. It was only because they did it in exactly this way. And they went out of their way to say this does not give the government a free pass to start doing all kinds of things, even around regulating greenhouse gas emissions on a provincial level. It was only because they did this one very specific type of thing that it gave them that sort of a pass. So Kenney seems to be worried that the government is going to increasingly use GHG emissions as a way to manage the resource sector in Alberta. And that seems to be his primary concern.
So, Todd, if you compare oil and gas and their attitude on this versus agriculture, not necessarily, they're going about it different ways than they have in the past. Do you see agriculture potentially getting more in line with how oil and gas feels? Like there's the certainty part of it. We'd rather have the tax than more regulations. Are we going to move in that way? Will we get our head wrapped around that kind of argument? Or is the brand on the carbon tax in the farm community just absolutely just like it's solidified?
Well, I think the biggest difference between the two industries is oil and gas. Every time there's a carbon tax increase, they just pass along at the pumps. They can pass their tax on to the end users, where as producers, primary producers, we can't pass those costs along. So I think that's, with other industries, that's a huge part of acceptance is, they may just bite their tongues, but at the same time, they can pass those costs along. So I think, definitions are important. We see that in some industries, the big emitter, question that large emitters that are that have been identified as participating in an international marketplace, that they're exempt from the carbon pricing, carbon tax. For a lot of Western Canadian agriculture, by definition, that's what we are as exporters. I believe a province like Saskatchewan is over 80% is exported. So if we're not affected on world markets, who is? So it's, definitions are going to be important in this conversation. And that's just one example there of, some of the larger emitters, bigger companies and so on that can talk all day about it being in favor of a carbon pricing, but really they can pass their costs along. So what is what's the incentive for them to improve their footprint?
Marla,
I would say that's partially true. Yeah, I agree with Todd that it's partially true. But there is another part of it so there's those two parts to the carbon tax. One is what you pay at the end for the consumer. And absolutely, that's something that they pass along. But they also have to pay on their own emissions as well. And they have to pay those same prices going up to 170 a ton. But the place that I also think it may be a little different, or maybe not easier than agriculture, but just a whole different context, is that there's a lot of pressure on that sector of the industry to reduce its emissions, because it's not just the carbon tax. They also have to adhere to the clean fuel standards, the output-based emitters program, and TIER, and all the rest of it, meaning that there's a huge incentive coming from a whole lot of different directions to bring down their carbon emissions. And for every bit that they reduce them, it doesn't just help in one area, it's going to help in like 4 different areas. And so that's, I think, a very different context than what agriculture may be facing.
Interesting.
And I think in all industries, it's going to end up being a market access issue as well, right? If we don't try and participate in some of these programs, we lose market.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to say, like, on the trade front, Todd, you brought it up. It's a really, really good point. Marla and I have had previous conversations about carbon adjustments and carbon tariffs, which is I think something that's quite fascinating that I'm sure is going to gain some momentum. Have you been hearing more about this at all, Marla?
I haven't. It seems like it's something that I think is going to come to pass. It's difficult, but the idea being that the U.S. has been making noises under President Biden now that they're going to institute a carbon border adjustment, and you can think of this like throwing up a moat or a wall around the United States and trying to make sure that by increasing the price of producing carbon, that they're not disadvantaging themselves on a competitive basis. So any products that are coming in from other countries where there isn't a similar cost for carbon dioxide, that there's going to be a tariff slapped on those products so that the U.S. can still compete. Because we're going to have the carbon tax in place, and because we have a couple of other things in place, we may be able to be on the inside of that border wall with the United States. If we're on the outside, it means that our stuff coming in is going to have these tariffs applied to it because we don't have sufficient carbon pricing in some sort of way, whether that's through a clean fuel standard or a carbon tax or whatnot. So as we move into the future, and we don't know exactly what this is going to look like, the chance to be paired with the United States in a sort of a joint Canada-United States approach, where the border wall or the moat goes around the outside of both of us, and we can still sell without a tariff and without a problem to our largest consumer, is really going to be important.
Well, I heard the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Jonathan Wilkinson, say yesterday after the Supreme Court ruling, basically that if you're a country that doesn't have a price on pollution, we can't take you seriously. So it'd be interesting to see if he feels that way, depending on what the Biden administration does. Do they before we get to some of the questions that are coming in from the audience, Marla, do they let Mexico into that little economic climate zone that you got going on there, that moat?
You know, we've had a lot of talks about this behind the scenes at the Canada West Foundation, and our feeling is that probably having a Canada and the United States and Mexico joint thing, assuming the rules are the same and the pricing is the same, makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot of parallels with Nafta and how that worked, and so those trade structures are in place. But realistically speaking, it's probably, even if that's the aspiration, practically speaking, it's probably easiest to start with the United States and Canada and then bring in Mexico than it is to try to negotiate some sort of a 3-way agreement right from the beginning.
Yeah. Hey, Todd, I'm going to throw this one to you. Jeff Nielsen, watching on Facebook. Great to see you, Jeff. He says, hey, join late. How is APAS going to move forward with the studies they've been doing a land about the Carbon Coalition going to move? And will the Carbon Coalition move? Will it be together going forward? See, I'm really struggling with words. Todd, try to answer that question.
So doing is that alliance? Maybe it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Alliance. Yeah, we're on board with that. We're partners with part of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. They're they're involved, with Grain Growers of Canada, for instance, within the Carbon Alliance. So no, our work with them is will continue, and the pricing models we've put out, we've always tweaked them, and unfortunately they've always been going up because the price of carbon's been going up. But we'll continue that work, and there's some work around fertilizer pricing and so on that's difficult to dissect because of transportation costs and all those kind of things. But fertilizer especially is pretty hard to find. How they arrive at the price anyway. It seems to be more related to what farmers can pay than what what the market will bear more than the carbon pricing. But we'll keep working on those pricing models, and share them with others, and look forward to working with the Carbon Alliance as well.
Yeah, I think how farm groups pivot here and what the messaging becomes. I think personally that's something I'm watching very, very closely with a lot of interest, because there's going to be a change in some of the things that are said, the change in some of the tone. Trying to which direction to kind of push and maneuver government on some of its policy. And Todd, you're right in the middle of all that, so I wish you the best of luck. I say that with all sincerity. Hey, Marla, here's a question for you, and this is something that I think a lot of just not farmers, but skeptics of pricing on pollution, they wonder this: How do direct-to-consumer carbon tax rebates cause consumers to change habits? If you get more money than you pay, what's the actual incentive?
Well, I think the incentive is you're going to get that money even if you're paying nothing. So let's say you're paying, I don't know, $2,000 a year in carbon tax, and you're getting back $2,500, and you know that you could make some changes and be paying $300 a year in carbon tax, and you're still going to get back $2,300. That right there is the incentive.
But how does it
change? So you get the money no matter what. What you pay in terms of the tax is up to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So for example, if I have I see my car sitting there in the driveway, and it's just a normal internal combustion engine car. And as this price starts to go up, and I can see that I'm paying more at the pump, and next time I go to buy a car, I have my choice between the gas or the electric vehicle. I'm still going to get the same rebate no matter what. The money's still going to come back into my pocket.
I see what you're saying.
But now I can choose whether or not to buy another gas car or buy an EV and have the tax or have no tax, and I still get the money in. That's the idea behind it, anyhow.
I'm in charge of my own margin, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Better way to say it. It's a Friday. There you go, Shaun.
See, I can get the words out once in a while.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about carbon border adjustments and about this, creating a moat around Canada and the U.S. Hey, Chris has a question here. Is there any connection between Nafta and carbon credits? Right now, we have the U.S. and Canada both working on a carbon offset program. Mm-hmm. Agriculture trying to get involved in both countries. Was there any? Do you know, Marla, if there was anything written up in the USMCA agreement about that?
I don't know.
Okay.
Really good question. And I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm not either. So, okay, what else we got here? I think we got through all of the questions from the audience. That's pretty good. Cool. So, Todd, from your perspective, how do you think, like when you come out next week and you're starting to talk to your members and you got meetings set with politicians, what is going to be your message to the provincial and the federal government when it comes to this whole topic of putting a price on pollution? How are you going to change as you try to make those communications?
Well, really, I don't think we're going to change at all. Really, our message right from the start is getting the proper recognition, the proper definitions as we move forward with these plans now. The ball seems to be firmly in the province's provincial court now, as far as, they're going to have to make a plan. Seems that's what we're seeing signals from, the Western provinces, especially that, Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're going to have some kind of provincial plan. So it'll be interesting. As I said before, hopefully the federal government will give those provinces enough wiggle room to be able to put plans in place that'll speak to their individual problems with how the current pricing model, federal backstop, really doesn't help, in their jurisdictions. So I think, we'll keep pushing the idea that agriculture is part of the solution, not the problem. And, if we keep taking all this money out of farmers' pockets, the end result's going to be we're going to have less money to improve our carbon footprint. A lot of those investments won't be made. It's pretty expensive to start trying to decrease your carbon footprint, be it new tractor, new combine with a better, more efficient carbon engine. As far as emissions, I'm not sure it's more efficient as far as how much diesel you burn, but that's another question. I think lots of producers experience that, right? You get a new tractor, it might have less going up the smokestack, but boy, it's sure likes its trips to the fuel tank too. So those are just examples of things that we're experiencing, in real time and in real life here on the farm. So we'll just keep pushing, doing what we're doing, and trying to get some traction on it.
You want me to do an episode on the do you like or dislike the Tier 4 engine, aren't you? Is that what you're trying to do here?
It'd be it'd be a lot of discussion, but I think it'd be
pretty one-sided.
Pretty one-sided for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Marla, any advice to wrap up here? Can you give any sort of advice or tips, recommendations for the ag sector as they approach the federal government on this issue?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Things like the carbon tax, I think probably either exemptions or rebates are the way to go, because agriculture doesn't have the elasticity. You can't just drive your tractor less to try to save money. The same way I could choose to, or instead of my car, I'm going to walk or take my bike. There's just not that kind of option. But there's other parts of this system that are developing that have more flexibility to be at least partial wins for the agriculture sector. Part of this is going to be under the clean fuel standard. The need for biofuels is going to be going way up. Whereas right now there's about a 5% blending requirement for gas and about 2% for diesel. The projections are that because of what the needs are for reducing carbon intensity of fuels, it's probably going to go up to be more like 15% in gas. And I don't know what the number is for diesel, but let's
11.
say maybe 10%.
11.
There you go.
Yeah.
11. So the opportunity to be able to sell into that because of the increasing demand is one place that ag could keep its eye on. Another is in offsets. Everybody's talking about net zero. Companies are talking about net zero. Provinces, municipalities, countries are talking about net zero. That's not a real zero. It's not an absolute zero. There's very few things that are going to be able to bring down their emissions to a real zero. They need to offset with other things. And so there's that whole system that's being developed now as to what can create offset credits that can be sold either under the clean fuel standards or under the offset market. And to the extent that ag can participate in creating offsets, it becomes an additional revenue stream. So I think keeping a really strong eye on how ag can get wins out of that evolving area, it's going to be huge. It's going to be absolutely enormous. We're not talking about a small stream here. I mean, it's going to be really huge. So I think that's going to be an area to really keep an eye on.
And don't forget about renewable diesel as well. That's another one to really, really watch for sure, because there's no the blending rate doesn't become as important. It can be like all in essentially. So there's a lot of excitement about renewable diesel for soybean and canola. Hey, this has been a great discussion. I really, really appreciate both of your insight. Fantastic stuff. Todd, thanks so much for joining us here today, and keep up the great work at APAS, and all the best to you at Seeding Time.
Okay, thanks, Shaun.
And Marla, always great to chat with you, and keep up the great work at Canada West Foundation.
Fantastic. And a big thanks to the ag sector for doing what they're doing with the conditions we've had over the last year.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. Don't forget to tune in to RealAg Radio, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain on Rural Radio 147. You can also download the podcast as well. Hey, everybody, have yourselves a great week.